The command, "Be fruitful and multiply," has been twisted into a purely physical directive about human reproduction. But Joel Goldsmith reveals a mystical truth that changes everything. This is actually the supreme spiritual instruction for consciousness expansion. When you understand what God truly meant, your entire life transforms into divine multiplication. This ancient instruction wasn't about making more bodies on earth. It was about multiplying the awareness of your divine nature throughout every area of your existence. Every thought, every relationship, every challenge becomes an opportunity to bear fruit of spiritual realization. This is the secret the mystics knew. The tragedy is that traditional religion reduced infinite spiritual power into biological function. They took the most profound consciousness teaching and made it about population growth. Joel Goldsmith spent decades recovering this lost mystical meaning, and today you'll discover what the awakened ones have always known about true fruitfulness. Here's what Joel Goldsmith understood that most miss. Be fruitful means to bear the fruit of spirit and human experience. When Jesus said, "By their fruits you shall know them," he was revealing the same principle. Your consciousness is the tree, and the fruit is the manifestation of divine qualities in your daily life. To multiply means to expand this spiritual awareness into every corner of your existence. Not to create more separate beings, but to recognize the one infinite being expressing as all. When you multiply consciousness, you see God where you once saw limitation. You experience abundance where you knew lack. You witness healing where disease appeared. Think about a fruit tree for a moment. It doesn't strain or struggle to produce fruit. The fruit emerges naturally from the life force flowing through it. Similarly, when divine consciousness flows through your awareness unobstructed, spiritual fruits appear automatically. Love, peace, wholeness, abundance, wisdom. This is fruitfulness in its true mystical sense. The original Hebrew word translated as multiply carries the meaning of increasing, becoming abundant, becoming great. But here's the mystical key Joel discovered. You're not creating something new. You're allowing what already exists in infinite measure to become visible in your experience through expanded awareness. God doesn't need you to create more of anything. All that the Father has is already yours, as Jesus taught. Your true work is removing the mental barriers that hide this infinite supply from your perception. When you multiply, you're actually subtracting the beliefs in separation, lack, and limitation that obscure divine abundance. This is why trying to demonstrate supply or health through willpower fails. You're attempting to create what already exists perfectly in spiritual reality. Instead, the mystic's approach is to become fruitful in consciousness, bearing the fruit of recognition that God's infinite completeness is the only reality. Then multiplication happens naturally. Joel Goldsmith taught that every person is a distribution center for divine grace. When you become fruitful in spiritual awareness, that consciousness naturally multiplies outward, blessing everyone in your sphere of influence. You don't have to evangelize or convince anyone. Your consciousness itself becomes the blessing. This is practical, not theoretical. When you maintain awareness of God's presence, people around you feel it without words. Business improves not through manipulation, but through the multiplication of spiritual consciousness in that environment. Relationships heal because love, which is God, is being recognized and allowed to multiply where fear once dominated. The command wasn't work hard and force results. It was be fruitful, which is a state of consciousness, and watch how that awareness naturally multiplies into manifestation. This understanding alone can transform your entire approach to every challenge you face. You stop trying to make things happen and start allowing divine fruitfulness to express. Let me share what happened with Robert, a businessman who discovered this mystical meaning during financial collapse. His company was failing, debts mounting, and traditional solutions weren't working. Then he encountered Joel Goldsmith's teaching on spiritual fruitfulness. Instead of frantically chasing money, he began each day recognizing divine abundance as the only reality. For 3 weeks, nothing external changed, but Robert noticed his consciousness shifting. Fear decreased while trust deepened. He stopped seeing lack and started recognizing opportunities he'd previously missed. His decisions came from peace rather than panic. This was consciousness becoming fruitful, though no material fruit had appeared yet. In the 4th week, unexpected contracts arrived. Former clients returned. New partnerships formed organically. Within 6 months, his business wasn't just recovered but transformed into something more aligned with his values. Robert hadn't manipulated circumstances. He'd become fruitful in consciousness, and that awareness multiplied into his affairs naturally. Elizabeth struggled with a health condition doctors couldn't resolve for 2 years. She'd tried everything medical science offered, plus countless alternative approaches. Nothing worked until she understood what Joel meant by bearing spiritual fruit. She realized she'd been trying to fix a material body while remaining fruitful in consciousness of disease. Her practice became simple but profound. Several times daily, she'd pause and recognize that God's perfect life was the only life she possessed. Not as affirmation or wishful thinking, but as spiritual fact. She became fruitful in awareness of wholeness, letting that consciousness fill her mind where worry previously dominated. The healing didn't happen overnight, but over 8 weeks, symptoms gradually diminished. Her doctors were surprised, but couldn't explain it medically. Elizabeth understood. When consciousness becomes fruitful in truth, that awareness multiplies into physical experience. The body simply reflects the consciousness beholding it. This is mystical healing through spiritual multiplication. Christopher and Amanda's marriage was ending after 15 years. Communication had broken down completely. Resentment filled where love once lived. Traditional counseling helped slightly, but couldn't reach the core problem. Then Christopher learned Joel's teaching about multiplying divine love through consciousness, rather than trying to fix a relationship through human effort. He stopped focusing on what Amanda wasn't giving him, and started becoming fruitful in recognition of God as the only love. Not pretending to feel something he didn't, but acknowledging spiritual truth regardless of emotional weather. He practiced this silently, expecting nothing from Amanda, just becoming fruitful in love consciousness. Within 3 weeks, Amanda noticed something different, though Christopher hadn't discussed his practice. The atmosphere between them shifted subtly. Within 2 months, they were communicating with unexpected tenderness. By 6 months, they'd rediscovered intimacy they thought was permanently lost. Love multiplied because one consciousness became fruitful in recognizing its source. Here's what these transformation stories reveal about true multiplication. It always begins in consciousness, never in circumstances. You can't multiply what you don't first bear as fruit in awareness. If your consciousness is fruitful in lack, lack multiplies. If fruitful in fear, fear multiplies. But when you bear the fruit of spiritual recognition, that awareness inevitably multiplies into manifestation. This is why Joel insisted that spiritual practice isn't about getting God to change your life. It's about letting your consciousness become so fruitful in divine reality that multiplication happens naturally. You're not begging for supply, you're recognizing infinite abundance already present. You're not pleading for healing, you're bearing fruit of wholeness already established. The command, be fruitful and multiply, gives you total responsibility and total power. Your consciousness is the tree. What fruit is it bearing? That fruit will multiply throughout your experience whether you want it to or not. This is spiritual law operating with complete precision and absolute reliability in your life right now. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others discover these mystical teachings. Subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. Which story resonated most powerfully with your current journey? Joel Goldsmith taught a complementary practice he called impersonalization that enhances your fruitfulness. When you encounter what appears as evil, lack, or disease in yourself or others, you refuse to personalize it. You don't deny the appearance, but you recognize it has no person in which to exist, because God alone is the true identity of all. This practice keeps your consciousness fruitful in truth rather than becoming fruitful in the appearance of problems. When someone seems angry at you, instead of taking it personally and becoming fruitful in hurt or resentment, you impersonalize. You recognize that only God's nature is actually present, and any appearance contrary to divine love has no real person expressing it. Watch what happens when you practice this consistently. The situations that once triggered you lose their power. You remain fruitful in peace while chaos appears around you. That peaceful consciousness then multiplies, often dissolving the very situations that seemed so solid. This is practical mysticism that transforms daily experience. Another tool Joel emphasized is what he called nothingizing the appearance. When you face what seems like a terrible problem, instead of fighting it or fearing it, You recognize it as nothing trying to appear as something. Not denying your experience, but refusing to give ultimate reality to anything unlike God's perfect nature. This keeps you fruitful in spiritual discernment rather than multiplying fear through believing every appearance. When financial lack appears, you don't pretend you have money you don't have, but you nothingize the appearance of lack itself by recognizing that infinite divine substance is the only reality, and temporary appearances of limitation have no ultimate existence. As you practice nothingizing, your consciousness becomes fruitful in spiritual authority. You stop being victim to circumstances and start witnessing from the awareness that only God's infinite goodness has actual being. This fruitful consciousness then multiplies, and the nothingized appearances often dissolve like mist before the sun. Joel also taught the practice of dying daily to the personal sense of self. This doesn't mean physical death or denying your individuality. It means daily releasing the belief that you're a separate person with personal problems, personal needs, and personal solutions. You die to that limited sense and become fruitful in awareness of your true identity as God's infinite expression. Each morning, before engaging the world, you can practice this death and rebirth. Release the person you think you are with all its history, limitations, and fears. Become fruitful in the recognition that God is your only identity, and this infinite consciousness is what goes forth into your day. Not the worried person, but divine awareness itself. When you live from this fruitful consciousness, everything changes. You're no longer trying to get God to help the little separated you. You're recognizing that the infinite one is the only you that exists. This consciousness naturally multiplies into experiences that reflect its infinite nature. Your circumstances transform because your identity has been renewed. The practice of meditation is essential for maintaining fruitfulness. But Joel's meditation isn't repeating mantras or visualizing outcomes. It's resting in wordless awareness of God's presence until your consciousness becomes so saturated with spiritual reality that it spontaneously bears fruit throughout your day. In meditation, you're not trying to accomplish anything or get anywhere. You're simply being still until the mind quiets and divine awareness reveals itself as your true nature. This is how consciousness becomes deeply fruitful. Like a tree's roots going deep into nourishing soil, your awareness goes deep into the soil of spirit and draws up life-giving truth. Then when you return to daily activities, that fruitful consciousness goes with you. You're not trying to remember what you learned. The consciousness itself has been transformed, made fruitful through meditation, and it naturally multiplies into your decisions, relationships, and challenges. This is why Jesus often withdrew to solitary places. He was maintaining fruitfulness through communion with the Father. But let's address the obstacles you'll face in becoming fruitful. The biggest challenge is the deeply ingrained habit of looking to effects rather than cause. You see the bank account, the diagnosis, the relationship problem, and your attention gets captured by the appearance. Your consciousness becomes fruitful in the problem rather than in spiritual truth. Joel warned that this is where most seekers fail. They understand the principle intellectually but continue feeding their consciousness with fear-based news, worry-filled conversations, and constant attention to what's wrong. Then they wonder why their meditation practice doesn't produce results. Your consciousness can't be fruitful in truth for 20 minutes and fruitful in fear for 23 hours and expect spiritual multiplication. The solution isn't perfection, but persistent redirection. Every time you notice your consciousness becoming fruitful in appearances, gently turn back to spiritual reality. Not fighting the thoughts, just choosing which field you'll cultivate. This gets easier with practice, but expect initial resistance. Your mind has years of habit focusing on effects. Another major obstacle is expecting instant multiplication. You spend 1 week recognizing divine abundance and wonder why your finances haven't transformed. This reveals consciousness still fruitful in the belief that you're manipulating God to change your life rather than allowing consciousness itself to be renewed. Joel emphasized that true fruitfulness is its own reward. You don't practice spiritual awareness to get something. You practice because living from divine consciousness is inherently fulfilling. When you need results to validate the practice, you're still operating from lack. And lack is what multiplies in your experience. The paradox is this. When you become genuinely fruitful in spiritual awareness for its own sake, multiplication into manifestation happens naturally. But when you're fruitful in spiritual ideas solely to get material results, You're actually being fruitful in materialism, and that's what multiplies. Trust the process, remain patient, and let consciousness deepen naturally over weeks and months. A third obstacle appears when temporary results arrive and then seem to disappear. You experience healing, then symptoms return. Money comes, then goes again. You feel tempted to conclude the practice doesn't work. But Joel would ask, did your consciousness remain fruitful in truth, or did you return to being fruitful in appearances? Often what happens is this. Spiritual practice produces results, you get excited about the results, and your consciousness shifts from being fruitful in God to being fruitful in the demonstration. You start fearing losing what you gained. That fear-filled consciousness then multiplies, and the demonstration fades because the consciousness maintaining it changed. The solution is recognizing that God is your only treasure, not the demonstration. Whether circumstances appear good or challenging, you remain fruitful in awareness of divine presence. This steady consciousness maintains multiplication because it isn't dependent on effects. Your fruitfulness is in spiritual reality itself, and that awareness proves more permanent than any temporary fluctuation. The final major obstacle is isolation. You're practicing spiritual fruitfulness while surrounded by people fruitful in fear, lack, and limitation. Their consciousness affects you more than you realize. Their conversations, their news consumption, their constant focus on problems can drain your fruitfulness if you're not vigilant. Joel's solution wasn't isolation from people but conscious protection of your awareness. You can love people without absorbing their consciousness. You can be compassionate without becoming fruitful in their fears. You maintain your practice regardless of what's happening around you, knowing that your fruitful consciousness is the greatest gift you can offer them. Consider finding others on this mystical path, even if just online. When two or more are gathered in consciousness of truth, that fruitfulness multiplies exponentially. You support each other's practice without making it dependent on each other. Your gatherings become opportunities for collective fruitfulness that benefits everyone involved and radiates outward. If these obstacle-breaking insights speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced Joel Goldsmith practices, and comment, which obstacle are you most ready to transcend now? Now let's explore advanced integration of fruitfulness in specific life areas. Consider your work environment, which might feel spiritually barren. Joel taught that wherever you are becomes holy ground when consciousness there is fruitful in divine presence. You don't need to change jobs or circumstances. You bring fruitful consciousness to wherever you are. Before entering your workplace, take 2 minutes in your car or outside the building. Recognize that divine intelligence is the only mind operating in this place. Every person you encounter is God's expression, regardless of how they appear. You're not going to work for money, but to be a transparency through which divine consciousness blesses everyone present. Watch how this transforms your experience over weeks. Difficult colleagues may soften, impossible situations may resolve naturally, or nothing external changes, but your inner experience becomes so fruitful in peace that the environment no longer disturbs you. Either way, you've multiplied spiritual consciousness where material consciousness previously dominated. This is advanced practice bearing tangible fruit. In family relationships, especially difficult ones, fruitfulness practice becomes profoundly challenging and rewarding. Your family knows exactly which buttons to push because they installed those buttons years ago. Traditional advice says set boundaries or limit contact. Joel's mystical approach goes deeper, becomes so fruitful in recognition of everyone's divine nature that the human personality can't hook you. This doesn't mean accepting abuse or pretending problems don't exist. It means your consciousness remains fruitful in the truth that only God's nature is actually present in your difficult relative. Their behavior is the false sense of self acting out, but it has no ultimate reality. You respond wisely to situations while your consciousness stays anchored in spiritual truth. Rebecca practiced this with her critical mother for 6 months. The criticism didn't stop, but Rebecca's reaction completely transformed. She remained loving but unaffected by the barbs. Eventually, her mother's behavior actually softened, though Rebecca never demanded this. Consciousness fruitful in love multiplied love, dissolving the pattern that seemed so permanent. Financial fruitfulness requires understanding that you're never seeking money, but recognizing infinite divine substance as the only reality. Money is just one temporary symbol of that infinite substance. When consciousness becomes fruitful in awareness of limitless supply, that awareness can multiply into money, opportunities, resources, or direct provision in unexpected ways. Daniel was unemployed for 7 months despite constant applications. When he learned this principle, he stopped the frantic job search and spent 2 weeks becoming deeply fruitful in consciousness of God as infinite supply, not denying his need for income, but recognizing that infinite substance was his true source, not any employer. After those 2 weeks of deepening consciousness, he resumed his search from completely different awareness. Within days, he received 3 unexpected opportunities, none through his previous applications. He accepted one that paid more than his previous job and aligned better with his values. Consciousness fruitful in infinite substance had multiplied into specific provision. Health and vitality emerge from consciousness fruitful in life itself. Your body is effect, not cause. The cause is the life force flowing through you, which Joel identified as God's own being. When consciousness recognizes this infinite life as your only life, the body tends to reflect that awareness of wholeness and vitality. Kevin was aging rapidly in his 50s, feeling exhausted and experiencing multiple health issues. He began practicing consciousness fruitful in eternal life, not as future heaven, but as present spiritual reality. Several times daily, he'd pause and recognize, God's infinite life is my only life. This life knows no age, no depletion, no limitation. Over 4 months, his energy returned dramatically. Several health issues resolved without specific treatment. He looked years younger. His doctor was puzzled, but couldn't deny the improvements. Kevin understood. Consciousness fruitful in infinite life had multiplied into physical vitality. The body simply reflected the consciousness beholding it. As you integrate these practices, something profound begins happening that Joel called living by grace. You stop trying to demonstrate specific things and start simply being fruitful in God awareness throughout your day. Then life unfolds with a mysterious rightness you couldn't have planned or manipulated. Needs are met before you articulate them, often in unexpected ways. Right people appear at right times. Solutions emerge for problems you didn't know how to solve. This isn't magic or coincidence. It's consciousness so fruitful in divine reality that multiplication happens continuously, spontaneously, perfectly. You're no longer living from the struggling human sense trying to make things happen. You're living as divine consciousness itself, and that awareness naturally multiplies the kingdom of heaven into earthly experience. This is what Jesus meant by seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. The ultimate fruitfulness, Joel taught, is becoming a transparency for divine grace to reach others. You're no longer a person with spiritual knowledge trying to help people. You're a consciousness so fruitful in God's presence that anyone in your sphere automatically receives benefit without your doing anything. This sounds mystical and impractical until you experience it. You walk into a tense room and tension dissolves. You're present with someone suffering and they feel inexplicable peace. You conduct business and integrity multiplies in that environment. None of this is your personal doing. It's fruitful consciousness multiplying naturally. Nicole discovered this working in a hospital. She couldn't change hospital policies or cure diseases directly, but she could maintain consciousness fruitful in divine peace and healing presence. Patients in her care consistently recovered faster. Families felt comforted in her presence. Doctors noticed but couldn't explain it medically. Fruitful consciousness was multiplying blessing automatically. Joel's final teaching on multiplication addresses the ultimate question: what is the fruit your consciousness should bear? Not just peace or supply or health, though these may appear. The ultimate fruit is conscious union with God, awareness that you and the Father are one, recognition that infinite divine consciousness is your actual identity and only reality. When consciousness becomes fruitful in this supreme realization, everything else follows naturally. You don't seek peace because you are peace. You don't pursue supply because you are infinite abundance. You don't chase healing because you are eternal wholeness. The demonstrations people seek are automatic byproducts of consciousness, fruitful in its divine identity. This is why Jesus could say, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Not the man Jesus, but the Christ consciousness he embodied. That same consciousness is your true nature. When you become fruitful in recognizing this, when this awareness multiplies throughout your entire being, you've discovered what be fruitful and multiply truly means. So the ancient command reveals itself as the supreme mystical instruction for human awakening. Be fruitful in consciousness of your divine nature. Let that awareness multiply into every area of your life, not through effort or struggle, but through resting in the truth of what you already are in God. Your practice going forward is beautifully simple. Multiple times daily, pause and recognize the presence of God where you are. Let your consciousness become fruitful in this awareness. Don't try to use it to fix problems. Just be fruitful in truth and watch how that consciousness naturally multiplies into your experience. The mystics throughout history discovered this secret. Joel Goldsmith spent his life making it practical for modern seekers. Now you have it. The question isn't whether it works, but whether you'll practice it consistently enough to become genuinely fruitful in consciousness. Everything in your experience will multiply according to what fruit your awareness is bearing right now. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative mystical teachings, and comment "I am fruitful" to confirm your new consciousness path.
Imagine for a moment that everything you've ever prayed for, every healing you've ever sought, every blessing you've ever desired, was already yours. Not coming to you, not on its way, but already present, already complete, waiting only for your recognition. This isn't fantasy. This is the profound truth Jesus revealed when he spoke those mysterious words, "Your faith has made you whole." But here's what will transform your life. He wasn't giving them something new. He was revealing what was already there. What happened when Jesus said, "Your faith has made you whole," a contemplation in the spirit of mystical Christianity, the great revelation? My friends, we must go deeper than the surface reading of Scripture if we are to understand what actually transpired in those remarkable moments of healing. When Jesus said, "Your faith has made you whole," he was not commending mere belief. He was not saying, "You believed hard enough, so I rewarded you." Such an interpretation reduces the Christ to a divine vending machine and makes God a responder to human willpower. No, something far more profound occurred. The Master was recognizing in that individual a breakthrough of consciousness, a momentary piercing of the veil that separates our human sense of life from spiritual reality. In that instant, the person ceased trying to become whole and recognized that they were whole. They stopped seeking healing and realized the illness was never part of their true nature, the nature of spiritual healing. You see, in the kingdom of God, which is not a place but a state of consciousness, there is no disease, no lack, no limitation. These things belong entirely to the world of appearances, to what we might call the dream of material sense. They are not creations of God, and therefore they have no spiritual law to sustain them. When Jesus looked at the hemorrhaging woman, the blind beggar, the centurion's servant, he did not see a sick person who needed healing. He saw a spiritual being, whole and perfect, in their divine essence, temporarily hypnotized by the illusion of separation from God. The healing occurred when the individual's consciousness aligned, even for a sacred moment, with this higher vision. Their faith was not faith in healing, it was faith as spiritual awareness. It was the inner recognition, I and the Father are one. In this oneness, I am already complete. What faith actually means in our ordinary thinking, we believe faith means hoping for something we don't have, trusting that God will eventually give it to us if we're sincere enough. But this is not the faith Jesus spoke of. True faith is the absence of the belief in two powers. It is the awareness that there is only one power, one presence, one life, and that life is God, expressing perfectly as your individual being right now. Consider the woman who touched Jesus' garment. She did not pray, "Please heal me." She thought, "If I may but touch his garment, I shall be whole." Do you see? She was not seeking wholeness from an external source. She was activating her recognition of the Christ presence, which dissolves all sense of separation between God and individual being. Jesus merely confirmed what had already happened in her consciousness. "Daughter, your faith, your realization of spiritual truth has made you whole." The inner kingdom. This brings us to perhaps the most revolutionary teaching in all of Scripture. The kingdom of God is within you, not coming, not earned, not deserved through good behavior or fervent prayer. Within, now, already established. Most of humanity lives in what we might call the parenthesis, that false sense of existence that seems to be separate from God, subject to conditions, vulnerable to disease, age, and death. But this is not reality. This is the dream from which we must awaken. When Jesus said, "Your faith has made you whole," the individual experienced a breakthrough out of the parenthesis and into the kingdom. For one illumined moment, they stopped believing in the material body with its vulnerabilities and recognized their true nature as spiritual consciousness, governed only by divine law. The principle of instantaneous healing. Now here is what we must understand if we are to live in this consciousness ourselves. The healing was not gradual. It was not a process. It was instantaneous. Why? Because truth realized is truth demonstrated. The moment the false belief dissolves, the manifestation changes, not because God intervened, God is always being perfect, but because our perception aligned with what already is. Think of it this way: if you're in a dark room and you turn on the light, does the darkness gradually fade? No. The instant light appears, darkness is gone, because darkness has no real substance or power. It is merely the absence of light. So it is with disease, lack, and limitation. They have no spiritual substance. They exist only as false beliefs in separation from God. The moment consciousness awakens to oneness, to wholeness, to the kingdom already established within, the outer manifestation must conform. Living this truth daily. So how do we apply this to our daily experience? How do we activate this faith that makes whole? First, we must stop trying to change conditions. We must stop treating symptoms, fighting problems, or attempting to manipulate the outer world. This only reinforces the belief that the problem is real and external to consciousness. Instead, we must go within. We must practice the presence. We must contemplate truth until it becomes our living consciousness. I am not a material body subject to material laws. I am spiritual consciousness, the very presence of God expressed as individual being. In this truth, I am already whole, already abundant, already at peace. This is not positive thinking. This is not affirmation. This is contemplative realization, resting in the awareness of what is already true until it becomes your actual experience. The Christ in you, when Jesus performed these healings, he was not using a personal power. He had attained Christ consciousness, the awareness of his unity with the Father. From that consciousness, he could look past appearances and recognize the spiritual perfection of every individual. But here is the great secret: that same Christ consciousness is not limited to Jesus of Nazareth. It is the true identity of every person. It is your reality, my reality, hidden only by our acceptance of the world's beliefs about limitation and separation. Your faith has made you whole really means your recognition of the Christ within you, your awareness of divine sonship has dissolved the illusion of disease and revealed the wholeness that was always present. Becoming a transparency to live in this healing consciousness, we must become what I call a transparency for truth. We must let go of the personal sense of self, the ego that believes it is separate, vulnerable, and in need, and rest in the awareness that God is living as us. This is the great surrender, not a surrender to fate or external circumstances, but a surrender of the false self. When we stop trying to live life from our limited human sense and instead let life flow through us from the infinite source, miracles become natural. Jesus could say, "I of myself do nothing," because he had realized that the personal, human Jesus had no power. Only the Father within the divine consciousness could do the works. Once we understand this principle, we stop trying to heal ourselves or others through human effort and instead become instruments of grace. The message for today, my friends: this truth is not historical. It is not something that happened 2,000 years ago to special people in a distant land. It is happening now within you as you contemplate these principles. Right now, in this moment, you are whole. You are complete. You are the very presence of God in expression, not potentially, not after more spiritual growth, not when you finally get it right. Now, the only question is, will you recognize it? Will you look past the appearances, the symptoms, the problems, and see the truth of your being? Will you activate that quality of consciousness Jesus called faith, that inner knowing that dissolves the illusion of separation and reveals the kingdom already established? Closing meditation. Let us close with this realization: I need not seek wholeness, for I am already whole in my spiritual nature. I need not seek God's presence, for God is the very consciousness with which I am aware. I need not seek healing, abundance, or peace, for these are already the nature of my being when I rest in truth. My faith, my recognition of spiritual reality, is making me whole in this moment. Not because I've earned it, not because I've believed hard enough, but because wholeness is my true nature, and I am now awake to this truth. The kingdom of God is within me, established, complete, perfect. I rest in this awareness. This, my friends, is what happened when Jesus said, "Your faith has made you whole," and this is what can happen in your experience today. Rest in this truth, live from this consciousness, and watch as the outer world conforms to the inner reality. Be still and know the power of recognition over petition. True healing comes not from begging God for wholeness, but from recognizing the wholeness that already exists within us as spiritual beings. Faith as spiritual awareness. Jesus was not praising blind belief, but rather acknowledging the individual's awakened consciousness to their divine nature and inherent perfection. The principle of inner causation. Wholeness manifests from within outward, never from external conditions or material remedies, but from the realization of our spiritual completeness, the Christ consciousness in you. Your faith refers to your own inner awareness of the Christ presence, the divine reality that dissolves the illusion of separation, disease, and lack. Living in the kingdom now. The healing was instantaneous because the person momentarily transcended time-bound thinking and experienced the eternal now where perfection already is. The greatest misunderstanding in all of spiritual practice is the belief that we must persuade God to give us something we lack. We approach prayer as supplicants, as beggars at the throne of divine mercy, hoping that if we pray fervently enough, sincerely enough, persistently enough, God will finally relent and grant us the healing, the abundance, the peace we seek. But this entire approach is built upon a false foundation. When Jesus acknowledged those who were healed, he was not congratulating them for convincing God to act on their behalf. He was recognizing something far more profound. They had stopped petitioning and started perceiving. They had ceased begging for wholeness and begun recognizing the wholeness that already existed as their spiritual birthright. This is the great shift in consciousness that transforms everything. Consider what happens when you petition God for healing. You are actually reinforcing the very belief that perpetuates your suffering. You are declaring through your prayer that you are sick, that you are separate from wholeness, that God has withheld something from you that you now desperately need. Every pleading prayer strengthens the illusion of lack and separation, but recognition operates from an entirely different consciousness. Recognition says, God has already established perfection as the law of my being. I need not beg for what already is. I need only open my awareness to the truth that has always existed. The healing comes not from changing God's mind about you, but from changing your mind about God and about your relationship to divine perfection. When you recognize that you are already whole in your spiritual essence, that recognition becomes the very faith that makes you whole. This is not denial of the problem. It is the dissolution of the false belief that created the problem in the first place. You stop trying to become something and start being what you already are. We must understand that Jesus was not praising mere intellectual belief or blind acceptance when he spoke of faith. The faith he recognized was not the kind that says, I hope this works, or I am trying to believe hard enough. That kind of faith is actually doubt disguised as conviction, because it still acknowledges the reality of the problem while hoping for its reversal. The faith Jesus acknowledged was spiritual awareness, a state of consciousness in which the individual had awakened to their divine nature. It was a momentary enlightenment, a sudden piercing through the veil of material sense into spiritual reality. In that sacred instant, the person was not believing in their wholeness, they were experiencing it as an already present fact of their being. Think of it as the difference between believing the sun exists while standing in a dark room versus actually stepping outside and feeling its warmth on your face. One is conceptual, the other is experiential. The faith that heals is the faith that has moved from concept to consciousness, from theory to realization. This awakened consciousness recognizes several profound truths simultaneously: that God is the only power and presence, that this divine presence constitutes individual being, and that therefore sickness and limitation have no legitimate existence in spiritual reality. The person has not convinced themselves of these truths through mental effort, they have perceived them through spiritual illumination. When consciousness rises to this level of awareness, it naturally dissolves the false beliefs that were manifesting as disease or lack. The healing is inevitable because light dispels darkness, truth dissolves error, and reality overcomes illusion. This is why Jesus could say your faith rather than my power. He was acknowledging that the individual's own consciousness had done the work by aligning with spiritual truth. The Master simply recognized what had already occurred within them, a breakthrough of awareness that made wholeness not a future possibility but a present reality. We live in a world that has trained us to believe in outer causation, that our conditions are created by external circumstances, material forces, heredity, environment, germs, economy, other people's actions, or sheer chance. This entire framework of understanding is backwards. It places power outside of consciousness and makes us victims of a world we cannot control. But the principle Jesus demonstrated reverses this completely. Wholeness, health, abundance, and peace do not come from manipulating outer conditions. They do not result from the right medicine, the right treatment, the right circumstances, or even the right people praying for us. These outer forms may appear to be involved, but they are not the true cause. They are at best instruments through which inner realization manifests. The truth is that consciousness is cause, and the outer world is effect. What appears in our experience is always the outpicturing of our state of consciousness. When consciousness is held in beliefs of separation, limitation, and vulnerability, the outer world conforms to reflect those beliefs. When consciousness awakens to spiritual truth, to oneness with infinite source, the outer manifestation must change to reflect that higher awareness. This is why Jesus could say the kingdom of God is within you. He was revealing that the source of all good, all healing, all supply exists in consciousness itself, not in the material world. You do not go out into the world to find wholeness, you go within to recognize the wholeness that already is, and then it appears outwardly. When someone experienced healing through their faith, what actually happened was an inner shift of consciousness that dissolved the false belief in disease. The outer healing was simply the visible evidence of an invisible spiritual transaction. The body did not heal itself through material. Means consciousness recognized truth, and the body conformed to that recognition. This is inner causation, the fundamental principle of all genuine spiritual healing. When Jesus spoke the words, "your faith," he was not referring to a personal human quality that some possess more abundantly than others. He was pointing to something infinitely more profound, the Christ consciousness awakened within the individual. This is the great secret, hidden in plain sight throughout the Gospels. The Christ is not the surname of Jesus. Christ is the divine presence, the very consciousness of God expressing as individual being. It is the truth of every person's identity, though most remain unaware of it. When someone experienced healing, they had momentarily touched this Christ presence within themselves, that eternal, unchanging spiritual reality that knows nothing of disease, age, lack, or death. This Christ consciousness recognizes no separation between God and individual being. It sees through the illusion of two powers, two presences, two lives. It knows only oneness, only wholeness, only the infinite expressing as the apparently finite. When this awareness awakens even briefly, it dissolves every false belief that contradicts spiritual truth. The woman who touched Jesus' garment was not healed by his personal power radiating outward. She was healed by her own inner recognition of the Christ presence, that divine reality available to all. Jesus simply acknowledged what had already occurred in her consciousness. He was saying, in effect, your awareness of the Christ within you, your recognition of your divine nature, has dissolved the illusion of disease. This is revolutionary because it means healing is not dependent on someone else's consciousness, not even Jesus. Every individual has access to this same Christ presence. It is not earned through worthiness or granted through favor. It is the permanent spiritual identity of every being, waiting only for recognition. When we understand this, we stop seeking healing from external sources and begin awakening to the healer within, the Christ consciousness that is our true nature, our real self, forever whole and forever one with God. One of the most striking aspects of these healings was their instantaneous nature. The woman's hemorrhaging stopped immediately. The blind man saw in that moment. The leper's skin was cleansed at once. There was no gradual improvement, no slow recovery process, no period of convalescence. Why? Because the healing did not occur in time, it occurred in consciousness, which exists in the eternal now. We human beings live almost entirely in time-bound thinking. We believe we were sick yesterday We are sick today, and we will need time to become well tomorrow. This entire framework traps us in a false continuum where healing becomes a process, a journey, something that requires duration. But this is not how spiritual reality operates. The kingdom of God, which is spiritual consciousness aware of its own perfection, exists only in the present moment. In this kingdom, there is no past disease to overcome and no future wholeness to attain. There is only the eternal isness of perfection, completely present right now. When someone experienced instantaneous healing, they had momentarily transcended time-bound consciousness. For that sacred instant, they were not thinking about their history of illness or hoping for future recovery. They were utterly present, aware only of the divine reality in this now moment. In that timeless awareness, the past had no power to continue its momentum, and the future had no need to gradually arrive. Everything was present, complete, whole now. This is why Jesus could say the kingdom is at hand, not coming. It is always already here, but we miss it because our consciousness is trapped in yesterday's memories and tomorrow's anxieties. The healing faith recognizes that wholeness is not a destination we travel toward through time, it is a present reality we awaken to in this eternal moment. When consciousness rests in the now, unencumbered by the burden of past or the longing for future, perfection reveals itself as already established. My dear friends, we have journeyed together through the profound mystery of what actually transpired when Jesus said those transforming words, "Your faith has made you whole." And now you understand this was never about believing hard enough, never about convincing God to change his mind, never about earning divine favor through spiritual effort. What happened in those sacred moments was a breakthrough of consciousness, a lifting of the veil, a sudden awakening to what has always been true but rarely recognized, that you are in your spiritual essence already whole, already complete, already one with the infinite source of all being. The healings Jesus witnessed were not miracles that violated natural law, they were demonstrations of spiritual law operating perfectly. When consciousness awakens to truth, when awareness shifts from the dream of separation to the reality of oneness, the outer world must conform. It has no choice. Truth recognized is truth demonstrated. But here is what matters most. This is not ancient history. This is not something that happened only to special people in a distant time. This same Christ consciousness that was in Jesus is in you right now. The same kingdom he spoke of is within you at this very moment. The same wholeness, the same completeness, the same divine perfection that he recognized in others. This is your true nature, waiting only for your recognition. You need not go anywhere to find it. You need not become more spiritual, more worthy, more evolved. You need only stop, be still, and recognize what already is. Stop petitioning and start perceiving. Stop trying to become whole and recognize that wholeness is the eternal truth of your being. The question before you is simple but life-changing. Will you continue to live in the dream of separation, believing yourself to be a vulnerable material being subject to every wind of circumstance? Or will you awaken to your true identity, a spiritual consciousness, governed only by divine law, complete in this eternal now? Your faith, your recognition of this truth is making you whole right now, not tomorrow, not after more practice, not when you finally get it. Now. In this present moment, the kingdom is established within you. The Christ presence is your consciousness. The wholeness you seek is the reality you are. Rest in this awareness. Let it become not just something you believe, but something you know, something you live, something you are. And as you rest in this truth, watch as your entire experience transforms, not because you change the outer world, but because you awaken to the inner reality that creates all outer form. This is the message Jesus demonstrated through every healing, through every teaching, through his entire ministry. You are not separate from God. You are not lacking anything. You are not broken and in need of repair. You are the very presence of the divine in expression, whole and complete and perfect, now and forever. Be still and know this truth. Live from this consciousness, and let your life become the evidence of the eternal wholeness that you are. Go forth now, not seeking but knowing, not becoming but being, not hoping for wholeness but recognizing the wholeness that has always been your spiritual birthright. Your faith, your awakened consciousness has made you whole, and so it is. What if I told you that everything you've been praying for, working toward, and desperately seeking has already been given? Not will be given tomorrow, not might be given if you're good enough, but already complete, already finished, already done. Most of us spend our entire lives climbing a mountain, only to discover there was never a mountain to climb. We've been standing at the summit all along, simply unaware of where we are. Today, we're going to explore the most radical, life-transforming statement ever uttered, 3 simple words that change everything: it is finished. What happens when you truly believe it is finished? Let us begin in silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of fullness. The silence in which we discover that striving ends and being begins. The great reversal: most spiritual seekers spend years, even lifetimes, trying to get something. We want to obtain peace. We work to achieve health. We struggle to demonstrate supply. We pray for harmony to come into our lives. But this very approach reveals that we have not yet understood the nature of spiritual truth. When Christ uttered "it is finished" from the cross, this was not merely the completion of a personal mission, it was the revelation of an eternal truth. The spiritual universe is already complete, not becoming complete, not moving toward completeness, but finished, whole and perfect now and forever. What happens when you truly believe this? A revolution occurs in consciousness. The end of striving first, all mental struggling ceases. You see, most of what we call prayer is actually a form of begging, asking God to do something that hasn't yet been done, to fix something that appears broken, to supply something that seems missing. But this kind of prayer comes from the belief that God's work is incomplete, that there are gaps in divine creation. When you truly believe it is finished, prayer transforms entirely. It is no longer petition, but recognition. You are not asking for what you need, you are acknowledging what already is. In the inner sanctuary of your being, you become still and listen. And in that listening, you hear the truth. All that the Father has is already yours. The kingdom is already within. The work is complete. This doesn't mean you become passive. Rather, you discover a different kind of action that flows from wholeness rather than lack, from being rather than becoming, living in the invisible realm. Second, you begin to live from the invisible rather than the visible. The material world shows us lack, disease, conflict, and limitation. And if we accept these appearances as ultimate reality, we must constantly work to fix them, change them, improve them. It is an endless battle, but when you accept that it is finished, you realize that these appearances are not the final word. Behind the visible world of form is an invisible realm of spiritual reality, and in that realm all is already complete, harmonious, and whole. You stop trying to heal the body and instead recognize the spiritual body that is forever perfect. You stop trying to demonstrate supply and instead rest in the awareness of infinite abundance already present. You stop trying to find peace and discover the peace that has always been at the center of your being. This is not denying problems, it is seeing through them to what is real and eternal. The dissolution of time third, the tyranny of time releases you. So much of our anxiety comes from living in time, worrying about the future, regretting the past, feeling that we are running out of time to accomplish what we must accomplish. But it is finished is an eternal statement. It exists outside of time. In the spiritual now, there is no tomorrow when things will be better, no yesterday that must be overcome. There is only the eternal present in which all of God's work is complete. When you touch this truth, you find yourself free from the pressure of time. You no longer live in the tension between what is and what should be. You rest in what eternally is. The end of personal responsibility here is perhaps the most liberating realization. When you truly believe it is finished, you discover that the weight of your spiritual life is not on your shoulders. You are not responsible for making spiritual truth come into being. You are not the creator of your own wholeness. Many students of truth exhaust themselves trying to hold the right thoughts, affirm the right statements, visualize the right outcomes. They believe their mental work is creating their reality. But this is still a form of personal effort, and it always leads to exhaustion. The truth is simpler and more restful. Your spiritual perfection does not depend on your thoughts, your efforts, your understanding, or your worthiness. It depends only on what God has already established, and God's work is finished. Your part is not to create, but to recognize, not to achieve, but to accept, not to become, but to be. The practice of release. So what is the practical application? How do we live from this truth? It begins with the practice of release. When a problem presents itself, whether it appears as lack, disease, conflict, or fear, you do not immediately rush to fix it through mental work or affirmations. Instead, you pause, you become still, and in that stillness, you release the belief that something needs to be done. You remind yourself, it is finished. The spiritual reality is already complete. I need not heal this, correct this, or improve this. I need only to be still and know. And in that stillness, something remarkable happens. Not through your effort, but through your rest, the truth begins to reveal itself. Harmony appears where discord seemed to be, supply flows where lack appeared, health emerges where disease seemed present. These are not miracles in the sense of violations of natural law. They are simply the natural revelation of what has always been true behind the veil of appearances. The life of grace. Finally, when you truly believe it is finished, you enter into a life of grace. Grace is not something you earn or achieve. Grace is the recognition that everything has already been given. You live not by effort, but by receptivity, not by working for God, but by letting God work through you. This doesn't mean you stop all activity, but your activity changes in quality. It becomes effortless, natural, spontaneous. You find yourself doing what needs to be done, but without the strain of personal responsibility, without the fear of failure, without the burden of making things happen through your own power. You become transparent to the infinite, and through your transparency, the already finished work of spirit becomes visible in your experience. So I return to where we began. It is finished is not a statement about something that happened 2,000 years ago. It is a statement about the eternal nature of spiritual reality. Right now, in this moment, all of God's work is complete. Right now, your true spiritual identity is whole and perfect. Right now, infinite supply, infinite harmony, infinite life are present where you are. The power of spiritual completeness. Understanding that it is finished means divine work is already complete, not something we must achieve through effort or struggle. When we hear the words "it is finished," most of us immediately think of something that has ended, something completed in the past. We think of a task checked off a list, a project brought to conclusion, a chapter closed. But this understanding barely scratches the surface of what these three words truly mean in the spiritual sense. The great revelation hidden within this statement is that divine work, the work of infinite intelligence, the work of God, is not something that was completed and is now done with. Rather, it exists in a state of eternal completion. This is difficult for the human mind to grasp because we live in a world of process, of becoming, of things that begin and end in time. We watch seeds grow into trees. We see buildings constructed brick by brick. We experience healing as a gradual process. Everything in our material experience speaks of incompleteness moving toward completion. But spiritual reality operates on an entirely different principle. In the realm of spirit, there is no incompleteness waiting to become complete. There is no imperfection gradually being perfected. There is no lack slowly being filled. The infinite intelligence that created the universe did not leave its work half-finished, waiting for us to complete it through our prayers, our thoughts, or our efforts. The divine creation is whole, perfect, and complete, not as something that once happened, but as an eternal state of being. This means that right now, in this very moment, your true spiritual nature is already perfect. Not becoming perfect, not moving toward perfection, but finished in its wholeness. The health you seek is not something you must create or attract or earn. It already exists as the truth of your spiritual being. The abundance you desire is not somewhere in your future, waiting to manifest. It already is, in the finished work of divine provision. The peace you long for is not something you must achieve through years of meditation and discipline. It already exists at the center of your consciousness, complete and undisturbed. This understanding turns our entire approach to spirituality upside down. Instead of seeing ourselves as incomplete beings trying to become complete, we recognize ourselves as complete beings who have simply forgotten our completeness. Instead of praying for God to give us what we lack, we rest in the awareness that God has already given all. Instead of working to overcome problems and limitations, we learn to see through the illusion of incompleteness to the reality of wholeness that has always been present. The implications of this are staggering. It means you are not a work in progress. You are not broken and in need of fixing. You are not spiritually poor, waiting to become rich. You are not disconnected from your source, trying to find your way back. All of these beliefs come from the assumption that spiritual work is incomplete, that something remains to be done. But when you truly absorb the truth that it is finished, you realize that nothing needs to be added to you. Nothing needs to be healed in you. Nothing needs to be achieved by you. Your spiritual wholeness is not potential. It is actual. It is not promised. It is present. It is not conditional upon your worthiness, your understanding, or your efforts. It simply is, has always been, and will always be, because the divine work of creation is complete, perfect, and eternal. This is not a philosophical concept to be debated. This is a living truth to be experienced, to be rested in, to be lived from. And when you make this shift from seeking completeness to recognizing completeness, everything in your experience begins to transform, transcending the seeking mind. moving from constant striving and searching to resting in the realized truth of spiritual wholeness. The human mind is a magnificent instrument, but it has one fundamental flaw. It believes its purpose is to seek. From the moment we awaken in the morning until we fall asleep at night, the mind is constantly searching for answers, searching for solutions, searching for peace, searching for God, searching for truth. This endless seeking becomes so habitual that we mistake it for spiritual practice itself. We believe that a good spiritual life is one in which we are always searching, always striving, always moving towards some higher state of consciousness. But here is the paradox. The very act of seeking implies that something is missing. Every time you seek, you are unconsciously affirming that you do not have what you are looking for. Every prayer that asks for something reinforces the belief in its absence. Every effort to attain spiritual truth confirms your sense of separation from it. The seeking mind, no matter how sincere, how dedicated, how disciplined, actually perpetuates the very sense of incompleteness it is trying to overcome. This is why so many spiritual seekers spend decades on the path and yet find themselves still searching, still incomplete, still feeling that something essential is missing. They move from teacher to teacher, from practice to practice, from book to book, always hoping that the next one will finally give them what they have been seeking, and occasionally they have moments of peace, glimpses of truth, experiences of transcendence, but then these fade, and the seeking begins again. The reason for this endless cycle is simple. They have not yet transcended the seeking mind itself. They are still operating from the fundamental assumption that they must find something they do not yet have, reach somewhere they have not yet arrived, become someone they are not yet being. But when you truly believe that it is finished, something radical happens to this whole pattern. The seeking stops. Not because you have found what you were looking for, but because you realize there was never anything to find. Not because you have arrived somewhere, but because you recognize you were never separate from your destination. Not because you have become someone new, but because you awaken to who you have always been. This is not the exhausted giving up of a defeated seeker. This is the profound rest that comes from seeing through the illusion of seeking itself. You stop looking for God because you realize God is not lost. You stop searching for peace because you discover that peace is the very ground of your being. You stop trying to attain spiritual wholeness because you recognize that wholeness is your nature, not your goal. In this state, the mind becomes quiet, not through effort but through understanding. When you are no longer seeking, there is nothing for the mind to do. Its constant activity was always in service of the search. Remove the search, and the activity naturally subsides. What remains is a state of simple presence, of being here now, without agenda, without goal, without the need for anything to be different than it is. This does not mean you become passive or indifferent to life. Quite the opposite. When the seeking mind is transcended, you become fully present to what is actually here. You stop living in the future, in the someday when I finally attain mentality, and you begin to live in the eternal now. And it is only in this present moment that the finished work of spirit can be experienced and known. The greatest spiritual teachers throughout history have all pointed to this same truth: seek and you will not find, but stop seeking and you discover what has always been present. Be still and know. Not be active and achieve, not be diligent and attain, but be still, cease the seeking, and in that stillness know the truth that has always been, that will always be, that simply is complete, whole and finished. Living from presence, not promise. shifting from living in anticipation of future salvation to abiding in the eternal now, where all is already accomplished. Most of humanity lives in a strange relationship with time. We spend our days caught between two mental states, dwelling on what happened yesterday or anticipating what might happen tomorrow. We replay past events, wishing we could change them, or we project into the future, hoping for better circumstances to arrive. And in this constant movement between past and future, we miss the only time in which we actually exist, the present moment, the eternal now. This temporal way of living becomes especially problematic in spiritual matters. We look at our current circumstances and see lack, limitation, discord, or disease. And because these conditions exist now, we naturally assume they must be corrected in the future. We pray for healing to come. We affirm abundance that will arrive. We work toward peace that we hope to eventually achieve. Our entire spiritual orientation becomes fixated on a promise, the promise that tomorrow will be better than today, that eventually we will overcome our present difficulties and enter into a state of harmony and wholeness. But living from promise rather than presence keeps us perpetually incomplete. No matter how much we achieve or overcome, there is always something more to attain, always some future condition we have not yet reached. We become like someone forever chasing the horizon. No matter how far we walk, it remains the same distance away. This is not because we are failing in our spiritual practice, but because we have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of spiritual reality. When you truly believe that it is finished, your entire relationship with time transforms. You realize that spiritual wholeness is not something that exists in the future, waiting for you to finally reach it. It exists right now, in this present moment, as an eternal reality. The completion of divine work is not an event that happened in the past, or a condition that will manifest in the future. It is the ever-present truth of what is here and now. This shift from living in time to living in presence is one of the most liberating transitions a human being can make. Suddenly, you are no longer waiting for your good to arrive. You are not postponing your peace until circumstances change. You are not projecting your wholeness into some distant tomorrow when you will finally have evolved enough, or learned enough, or overcome enough to deserve it. Instead, you discover that everything you have been waiting for is already present, hidden perhaps from your awareness, but present nonetheless. The kingdom of heaven is not coming someday, it is within you now. The supply you need is not on its way, it is already provided. The healing you seek is not a future event, it is the present reality of your spiritual being. This does not mean that change stops occurring in the visible. Circumstances still shift, situations still evolve, and what we call progress still happens. But your inner state is no longer dependent on these temporal changes. You are no longer living from the anxiety of will my good arrive, or the frustration of why hasn't it happened yet. You rest in the awareness that in the spiritual now all is already complete. Time becomes your servant rather than your master. You use it to move through the material world, but you are no longer enslaved by it. You can make plans for tomorrow without living in tomorrow. You can remember yesterday without being imprisoned by yesterday. And most importantly, you can be fully present to this moment, knowing that this moment right now contains all the wholeness, all the peace, all the abundance that you have been seeking. The promise becomes presence, the future becomes now, and in that eternal now, you discover what has always been true, but what you could never see while you were living in time. It is finished, complete, whole, and perfect in this very moment. The illusion of separation dissolved. Recognizing that belief in it is finished reveals the unreality of separation from infinite supply, health, and harmony. From the moment we gain self-awareness as human beings, we live with a deep, often unconscious sense of separation. We feel separate from other people, separate from nature, separate from the source of our good, and most fundamentally, separate from God or infinite intelligence. This sense of separation is so pervasive, so woven into the fabric of our daily experience, that we rarely question it. We simply accept it as the basic reality of existence. This belief in separation creates every problem we experience. When we feel separate from the source of supply, we experience lack and limitation. When we feel separate from the source of health, we experience disease and weakness. When we feel separate from the source of harmony, we experience conflict and discord. When we feel separate from the source of life itself, we experience fear and death. All suffering, at its root, traces back to this fundamental illusion that we are isolated beings, cut off from the infinite, dependent on external conditions for our well-being. We spend our lives trying to bridge this perceived gap. We work hard to acquire things from outside ourselves. We seek validation and love from other people. We pray to a God we imagine is somewhere else, asking this distant deity to send us what we need. We study spiritual truth, hoping to eventually close the distance between where we are and where God is. Everything we do is colored by this underlying assumption of separation. But when you truly believe that it is finished, this entire structure of separation collapses. You begin to realize that the gap you have been trying to bridge never actually existed. You were never separate from infinite supply, because infinite supply is the very substance of your being. You were never separate from perfect health, because the life that flows through you is divine life, whole and complete. You were never separate from harmony, because the consciousness in which you live and move and have your being is infinite harmony itself. The finished work of spirit means that wholeness is not something external to you that you must somehow obtain. It is not somewhere else, waiting for you to find it or attract it or earn it. It is the very nature of what you are. The infinite did not create you and then step back, leaving you to fend for yourself in a world of limitation. The infinite is not separate from its creation. Where you are, infinite intelligence is. What you are, at the deepest level, is the expression of infinite wholeness. This realization changes everything. You stop looking outside yourself for your good. You stop begging external sources for what you need. You stop waiting for conditions to change before you can experience peace. Instead, you turn within to the infinite, source that has never been absent, that has never withheld anything, that is forever complete in its provision. This is not mere philosophy or comforting belief. This is a profound shift in consciousness that has practical, tangible effects in your daily experience. When you stop living from the consciousness of separation, when you rest in the awareness that you are inseparably one with infinite supply, infinite wisdom, infinite life, then the evidence of that oneness begins to appear in your experience, not because you have created it, not because you have attracted it, but because you have stopped blocking it with the belief in separation. The illusion dissolves not through effort, but through recognition. You do not have to work to become one with your source. You already are one. You do not have to earn your place in divine wholeness. You have never left it. The separation was never real. It was always only a belief, a misperception, a dream from which you are now awakening. And in that awakening, you discover the truth that has always been. It is finished, whole, and you are forever one with that wholeness. Silent listening over mental effort, discovering that true belief comes through inner stillness and receptivity rather than through mental affirmations or forceful thought. Throughout human history, we have been taught that achievement requires effort. We learn from childhood that if we want something, we must work for it, strive for it, fight for it. This principle seems to govern every aspect of material life, and so naturally, we assume it must also govern spiritual life. We approach our spiritual practice with the same mentality we bring to worldly accomplishments, through mental effort, through forceful thinking, through determined concentration. We wake up in the morning and immediately begin our mental work. We affirm what we want to be true. We deny what appears to be false. We visualize desired outcomes. We repeat mantras and positive statements. We concentrate intensely on holding the right thoughts, believing that if we can just maintain the correct mental state long enough, if we can just think powerfully enough, then the spiritual reality we seek will manifest in our experience. And when it doesn't happen as quickly as we hoped, we assume we simply haven't worked hard enough. So we redouble our efforts, affirm more vigorously, concentrate more intensely, and exhaust ourselves in the process. But here is a truth that contradicts everything the world has taught us. Spiritual realization does not come through mental effort. It comes through release. It comes through letting go. It comes through silent, receptive listening rather than forceful, active thinking. When you truly believe that it is finished, you realize that there is nothing for you to mentally create or produce. The work is already complete. Your mind does not need to make something happen. Your thoughts do not need to cause spiritual reality to come into existence. Your affirmations do not create truth. They can only recognize truth that already is. This understanding completely transforms the nature of spiritual practice. Instead of approaching your inner work as a task to be accomplished through mental labor, you approach it as a state of receptivity to be entered. You become still. You become quiet. You release all effort, all striving, all attempting, and in that stillness, in that silence, something remarkable happens. The still, small voice can finally be heard. The presence that has always been there, but was drowned out by the noise of your mental activity, becomes apparent. The wholeness that exists beneath all your thoughts about lack and limitation rises into awareness, not because you created it through your mental work, but because you finally stopped creating static with your mental activity. This is what true prayer looks like. Not petition, but listening. Not speaking to God, but allowing God to speak through the silence of your being. Not directing infinite intelligence with your thoughts, but opening yourself to be directed by it. Not using your mind to produce results, but quieting your mind so that what is already finished can reveal itself. The great spiritual masters have always known this. They have spoken of meditation, of contemplation, of the practice of presence. But often we misunderstand even these teachings, turning them into another form of mental work, another technique to master, another effort to make. We try to meditate our way to enlightenment, concentrate our way to realization, visualize our way to wholeness. But genuine spiritual practice is not doing, it is being. It is not effort, it is rest. It is not thinking correct thoughts. It is moving beyond thought altogether into the direct experience of what is. When you sit in silence, when you release all mental striving, when you simply listen with no agenda, no goal, no attempt to make something happen, then the finished work of spirit becomes apparent to you, not as something you achieved, but as something you finally allowed yourself to experience. Not as the result of your mental power, but as the revelation that comes when mental activity ceases and pure awareness remains. This is the great reversal. Strength comes through surrender, knowing comes through not knowing, and spiritual realization comes not through the noise of mental effort, but through the power of silent listening. And so we return to where we began, but now with eyes opened to see what was always present. It is finished. 3 words. Yet in these 3 words lies the entire secret of spiritual liberation. Not a secret hidden from you, but a secret hidden within you, waiting only for your recognition. You have sought for so long, you have worked so hard, you have prayed so earnestly, you have struggled so valiantly to become what you already are, to obtain what you already have, to reach where you have never left. And perhaps now, in this moment, you can finally rest from all that seeking, all that striving, all that endless effort to complete what is already complete. The divine work is finished, not your work. You were never meant to finish what only infinite intelligence could accomplish. But God's work, the work of creation itself, stands complete, perfect and whole in this eternal now. Your health is finished, your abundance is finished, your peace is finished, your wholeness is finished, not as future promises, but as present realities existing right now in the spiritual truth of your being. What remains is not for you to create this reality, but simply to accept it, not to achieve it, but to acknowledge it, not to become it, but to be it. When you leave this moment, you will return to a world that constantly testifies to incompleteness. You will see lack, limitation, disease, and discord. The material senses will present their evidence, and that evidence will seem very real, very solid, very convincing. And in those moments, you will have a choice. You can return to the old way, the way of seeking, striving, working to fix what appears broken and supply what appears missing. Or you can remember these words, "It is finished." You can become still. You can release the burden of personal effort. You can listen in the silence for the truth that transcends all appearances. And in that listening, in that stillness, in that sacred receptivity, the finished work will reveal itself in your experience. Not because you made it happen, but because you finally stopped preventing it. Not because you were worthy, but because wholeness knows no unworthiness. Not because you understood, but because truth needs no understanding to be true. This is not the end of your spiritual journey. This is the beginning of living from an entirely different foundation, not from the consciousness of lack seeking fulfillment, but from the consciousness of completeness expressing itself. Not from separation seeking reunion, but from unity, recognizing itself. Not from time seeking eternity, but from eternity playing in time. So take this truth with you. Let it sink deep into your consciousness. Let it dissolve the burden you have carried for so long, the burden of trying to complete yourself, perfect yourself, save yourself. You need not carry that weight another moment. It is finished. Rest in that. Live from that. Be that. And watch as the life you have always sought begins to live itself through you effortlessly, naturally, spontaneously, not as something you achieved, but as something you finally allowed. Go now in peace, not the peace you must create, but the peace that already is, not the peace of tomorrow's promise, but the peace of this moment's presence, not the peace of personal accomplishment, but the peace of divine completion. It is finished. It has always been finished. And you are forever held in that finished perfection, now and always. Be still and know